I'm going to hand over to Michael Garvey from the China Joint Colleges office in a second to begin this session. Just to note that if you have any questions arising or any comments during the session, you can stick them in the chat, and I'll be keeping an eye on that. Yeah, please feel free to ask anything that comes up, and I'll keep an eye on that stuff and feed it through to Michael then. So Michael, I'm going to spotlight you now and unspotlight myself. Welcome, Michael. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, great. Can I just check everybody can hear me okay? I sometimes have trouble with my microphones. I've got 4 of them, so okay. So I'm just going to share my screen, and I'm hoping this works smoothly because I've got a lot of screens in front of me, so I need to make sure I'm sharing the right one. So you should all be looking at a white screen that says Power Query on it. Can people nod their heads? Okay, great. Before I start, I mean, as Jeremy says, I work in the China Joint Colleges office. Been working in UCD for about 10 years, but I've been using Excel probably for 15, 16 years in various different jobs. And Power Query, I suppose, is a feature of Excel, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. Also, I should mention that I'm doing this presentation because of Paula McGarry. It was her idea to do the presentation, so I have to say thank you to her, or I have to maybe get angry with her if it doesn't go well. But thanks to Paula for that, and also thanks to Paula for actually introducing me to Power Query, because this is something I've only been using for a couple of months. And I think that after I've given the presentation, I'm hoping that the simplicity of this or the ease of learning this comes through, because it's not something that has a huge learning curve, I don't think. Also, I talked to a lot of colleagues last week about this presentation just to get ideas and try and make it more relevant, not just about what I do, but what people across the university are doing. Unfortunately, I haven't really had time to construct models based on other people's experience, but I think what I will show, it's applicable to a lot of different contexts, and so I hope I'll show that during the presentation. So I suppose the first thing to do is to explain what Power Query actually is. So you'll find in Excel there's a lot of powers. There's Power Query, PowerPoint, Power BI, Power this, that, and the other, right? So it's important to establish that we're talking about Power Query and not Power something else here. If you actually Google Power Query, you'll find a lot of references to Power BI, which is a different application, but it has a lot of the same, same uses, I suppose. So this is, from Microsoft Excel online training, this is what they define Power Query to be. So it's a data connection technology which allows you to connect to various different sources of data. And as I've mentioned, it's available in Excel and Power BI desktop. So we're just going to be looking at Excel today. And to me, Power Query is about data. It's about finding data. It's about playing around with it and about getting a better set of data after you've done that, so that you can make a more useful report. So if we look at what actually is data, this is the dictionary definition of data. And to me, it really means information. In my job, as a program manager in the China Joint Colleges, I need information about lots of stuff like curriculum, student registration, grading, all sorts of stuff. And I sometimes need to put all that information together to do my job. So we're going to be looking at information that we're going to collect. So we have to find it. We need to be able to put it together and use this information. We get information from various different sources. We put it together to get better information, to make better decisions and do our job better, essentially, and quicker too. The best analogy I could think of is it's like cooking, baking a cake, right? So, I mean, if you bake a cake, you have to go shopping, you have to buy your ingredients, and then you have to take them home, you have to mix them, put them together, and you make a loaf of bread, right? I mean, if you think about that, you're getting stuff from lots of different sources, you're putting it together, and you're making something better, something that tastes good. So as I've said here, you wouldn't eat a bag of flour by itself because it wouldn't taste very good. It wouldn't be very nice. But if you add raisins and yeast and all sorts of stuff, then you might get something better that people actually want to eat. By the way, there's a slide later on, or something I'm going to show you later on. And if anybody can tell me, I'm going to show you a list of people. And if anybody can tell me who those people are, then I will buy you a cake and a cup of coffee. But this is going to come up later on in the presentation. Anyway, so the first thing I want to look at is data sources, because that's the first part of what we're going to do here is actually find information, find data. So I've got another quote here, which is actually taken directly from the Excel ribbon, right? So what we need to do then is actually look at Excel. So I'm hoping people can see an Excel sheet on the screen. Could I have a few heads nodding? Okay, great. Now, this is Microsoft Excel. So this is probably, I hope, quite familiar to most of you. But if you've never used Excel before, it doesn't matter, because actually, in some ways, coming to Power Query as a sort of Excel novice is nearly better than you know, if you've used formulas and so on. So when you open Excel, this is what you see. You've got at the very top here, you have a thing called the ribbon, and in the ribbon there's lots of useful different things. You know, you can copy and paste. You can you know, put nice colors in cells, and you can do all sorts of stuff like that. You can write in the cells, and then you have this little box up here where you can write formulas like that. So that's great. So there's Excel. Now we need to find out where Power Query lives, and it's a little bit confusing because Power Query isn't actually called Power Query anymore, which I didn't realize until last night. So I probably should have called the presentation something else. You'll see here there's a thing called Power Pivot. That's something that you probably should learn after you've discovered what Power Query is, but it's also quite useful. I'll mention a bit more about that at the end. So data is where Power Query lives, which is not surprising because, as we've seen, it's all about data. So you might be familiar with some of the features of the ribbon, of the data section of the ribbon, such as filtering. You know, you can apply a filter and you can use that to find, you know, names, student numbers, whatever. But Power Query is in this section over here, which is called Get and Transform Data. So I think it was changed from Power Query to this title in the 2016 version of Excel. So apologies for the naming error there. But anyway, Power Query lives within this section. Now, if we look at the ribbon, if I hold my mouse over Get Data, you'll see where that quote comes from. And there's quite a good help section here, which is probably the best place for us to start. So if I click on Tell Me More, I get this section here. And I'll just read what it says because it's probably a bit small on the screen. Get and transform in Excel. Excel includes a powerful set of features called Get and Transform, which provides fast, easy data gathering and shaping capabilities. And that's, again, I know I'm kind of repeating myself here, but it's fast, it's relatively easy, and it allows you to manipulate data to give you better information. It enables you to connect, combine, and refine data sources to meet your analysis needs. Features are also used in Power BI and the Power Query add-in available for previous versions of Excel. So that's, you know, it's called Get and Transform, but really we're talking about Power Query. And if you look at this graphic here, which I've also put on my presentation, you'll see, I suppose, the process that you go through when you use Power Query to work with data. So you first of all have to find your information, your data. Then you have to work with it a little bit. You have to transform it. You know, maybe you have to delete some columns. You have to change the formatting of some numbers or something like that. Then you may want to combine data. So you may have a couple of different sources. You might want to put them together, and then you load. And following this is when you do your reporting. Now, we're not really going to talk about reporting today, but I might mention it briefly at the end, some of the ways in which you can report on good data and why that's important. So, oh, sorry, before I go to that section, I need to go back to Excel for a minute. Just talking again about data sources. If you look at the get and transform section here, you can see that you can get data from a lot of different sources, from table, from the web. And if I click on the get data, this will show you a lot of the different sources that you can use. So from file, you can use Excel workbook, CSV files, XML. You could even get data from a PDF. If you have a table in a PDF, Power Query can actually read that table and you know, turn it into a spreadsheet, which might be really useful for some people, depending on how your data is presented. And also from a folder. Now, in what I'm going to show you, the examples are going to be mainly about looking at workbooks, CSV files, and folders, okay? Because as I'll show later on, that's kind of how most of the data in Infohub is actually presented. But there's also other sources here. You have databases, SQL servers, Access databases. You can even connect to Salesforce. I don't know if anybody uses Salesforce in UCD, but you know, if you had a what would you call it? I suppose a customer tracking database of some kind. You could fit that in with information from, you know, folders that, you know, CSV files in Infohub, and make a really kind of interesting set of data from that. There's also online services too. You can connect directly to a website. You could connect to a list on Wikipedia if you wanted to. Doesn't work. I've tried it. You can't actually connect directly to Infohub. You have to use a password for that. So you have to download the information there and then work with it. So there's a lot of, I mean, you know, there's a huge number of sources that you can potentially combine into a new set of information, which is fantastic. So we go back to the presentation. We're going to look a little bit at Infohub first, because that's obviously our information system in UCD. And that's where my examples are going to focus on today. It's mainly going to be looking at data from Infohub and also data that's, you know, sort of external to UCD. And hopefully you'll be able to see how you can, first of all, find the information, but also, you know, manipulate it and put information from separate sources together and give you a better set of information. So if we go to Infohub, now I should say as well, I'm going to be showing you a lot of different reports with lots of data in them. Everything is anonymized. You're not going to see a student number at any stage. I've basically used real reports, but I've kind of made a dummy version of everything. So don't worry, I'm not going to show anything that's I shouldn't show, I hope. Anyway, we have here Infohub, so I think most people will be familiar with this page. Now, the thing about Infohub, I think Infohub is a fantastic information system. It can sometimes be hard to find the exact information you want. My experience of it is it's all there, but sometimes you have to kind of think a little bit about what section it might be in, okay? And I'm gonna look at a few different sections of Infohub and basically show you how you can get information from them and put it all together into a report. And hopefully we have enough time to do a few exercises actually in Excel on that. But like, you know, to do a more fully featured session on this would take a long time. So I'm hoping there'll be time for questions, and then I'd be happy to follow up later with people if they're interested. So if we look here, this is the student section. And I'm going to be showing you stuff from the registration and class lists. and the curriculum management system. But there are other areas too. I mean, I know admissions and recruitment, there's a lot of information there that you might want to pair with information here and here. But for the, for today, we're just looking at these sections. But this could apply to any section of Infohub, because there's a consistency in the way that information is stored and also in the way that you can access downloads of information in Infohub, which is really, really helpful in using Power Query. Let me see. If we start off here with registration and class lists. So I'll just go back to my presentation for a second. And we're going to sort of look at a few different problems and solutions in using Power Query. And they're going to be initially focused on getting data from Infohub. So my first problem is, so it's the start of the semester or start of the academic year. We've got whatever it is. I'm going to be looking at information from Beijing Dublin International College. So we've got approximately 1,200 students. And, I want to see if they've confirmed their attendance for the start of the academic year. So how do I do that? Well, I could look in Infohub and I would see lots of very, very useful information. So here are some of our programs here. I can see, BHENG 06, BHSCI 012, BHSOC 007. And this tells me how many students are in each stage, which is good. And then if I click into some of the information, for example, this program here, I can see, okay, so there's 91 students. I can get their photos, I can email, I can even see how many have withdrawn, so that's great. And then if I further click into that, a program class list, I can get this information here. So I can look at this registration status. I can see, well, okay, so the students have registered for the year, or maybe they're provisionally enrolled, in which case, possibly somebody needs to contact them and say, are you coming back, or whatever it is. Now, the problem I have here is that I've got one report here for one stage of one program, but we have 3 different programs and we've got 12 different stages, and I want one list. I don't want 12 lists. So how do we do that? Well, we need to go to Excel and we need to go to Power Query and do that there. So I'm just going to show you a couple of folders that I've set up. Now I've prepared my ingredients, if you like, beforehand, and just to save a bit of time here, because what we have to do initially is we need to go here. We need to open up all of the different programs, and then we need to download the information. Now, if you look, I don't want to show you the next page here because you'll see the student numbers, but basically every section here has this feature here, export to Excel, right? Now, export to Excel, this is where the consistency comes in, and it's very useful because I don't know if you can see that at the bottom, I'll just open up this file. This is a CSV file, right? And pretty much every section of Infohub makes the information available as a download, a CSV file, right? Which is great, because what that means is the information here is not really relevant. It's more the fact that there's a consistency to it. I could download 100 files like this from different programs, and they'd all look exactly the same. The information would be different, but the format would be the same. And that means I can combine all these files into one if I want, which is, for me, working with 3 different partnerships in China with, multiple programs, it's really useful. So we just get rid of that. So here, let's just, accept that I've downloaded all of these files, okay? And all of the files look like this, but we've downloaded the Excel version of this. And all of the files have been saved in this folder here, which I've called student status. So you can see here I've got 13 CSV files, and there's lots of data in each of them. And we want to make one list from 13 files. So I'm going to open up Excel, and we're going to go through the exercise of combining these files into one list. So we go to get data and we look for our data. We need to find it first. Now, I should say as well, you can see that I've saved these files here to a folder, okay? Power Query works really, really well with Infohub data if you have an organized, consistent filing system where everything is stored in a way that you can find it and go back to it regularly. If you have like files all over the place, if you keep everything in your download folder, this isn't going to work. So you do need to set up a consistent filing system whereby you can find stuff, you can delete data, and you can put new data in. Anyway, we get the data from the file. So we're going to get this information from a folder, okay? So I've got 12 CSV files in one, or 13 actually in one folder, and I need to find that folder. So I just go and point to the folder I showed you on screen, which is buried in here somewhere. And okay, so student status. I just click open, and then this is where Power Query does some kind of automatic work with the files. So it's putting everything together. It's baking the cake, if you will. And you can see here, and then you've got a bunch of options for working with this. You can combine, transform, combine and load to. These all do different things. The ultimate outcome of this is going to be creating a single table where everything is just, you know, together. So we'll click combine and transform data. And this gives you a look at the Power Query editor, which I hope appears on this screen rather than the other screen. Find out in a second. So we can see here, Power Query is just, you know, asking me, is this okay? This is an example of the work, you know, and this looks fine to me. We can see the students. And again, you can see that these are completely random numbers, and the names are you know, obviously fake names, so that's fine. Programs are real, but you know, so we click OK here. That all looks fine. And this takes a few seconds. It's usually fairly fast. I'm going to be using prepared examples for most of the rest of it, but this is just to give you a look at the Power Query editor. Now, this is unfortunately gone to a different screen, so just give me a second. Now, can people, again, nod their heads? Can you see? Okay, great. So here's Power Query editor here. Now, you can see here that if you look here, this is the name of the file that I've gotten from the folder. So you can see here that there are files with different names. So it's clear from this that we've managed to merge and combine all these files into one. So what you're looking at here is a list of the status of every single student in PDIC, all 1,254 of them in one list instead of 13. And that's very useful to me because you know, like in some people's roles, like looking at one list of one stage is fine. And if that's all you need, then this isn't really something you need. But I need to see all this information together. So this allows me to do it. We have here some columns that are useful and some columns that are not so useful. Now you can see here, Power Query has a very, very useful feature, which it sort of records the steps. So it's always possible to go back and erase a step if you find that something has gone wrong. You can see here, if we go back to the start, this is the first thing. Then these are some automatic transformations that happen. So this is really, you know, working with data and manipulating it and changing it and presenting it in a format that's useful to you. Now, rename columns, remove some columns. So that's fine. So we have this this file here. Now, I don't particularly think this source name is very useful, so I'm just going to get rid of that. So I'm going to remove the column, delete that. Now, overall registration status, I mean, there's nothing there, so let's get rid of that too. This one is blank as well, so get rid of that. And so we have a table here, which looks fine. Now, let's suppose I wanted to, well, actually, no, I think that's fine here. Now you can see here, okay, provisional registration. This student hasn't actually confirmed their attendance. This one hasn't done it either. So I've got useful information there. I'm happy enough with that. So I'm going to load that. And what happens now is Excel basically makes a table from that information. And there you go. You can see here that there is about 1,350 rows of data here, which is confirmation that we have all the information we need here. So that's great. We have a table, and we have more information than we had at the start. So we've combined data from different sources together. So that is great. I'm not going to save this because I have a previous version saved, which we'll work with later. So I'm just going to delete that. Now, if we go back to the presentation for a second, so we can see our solution here was to use Power Query, merge the files into a single table, which is great, except you have the other thing I wanted to show you here was about how the data can be changed. So I'm going to open up a report that I made before, and that's this one here, BDIC current students. And I just want to show you what happens when you change the source data, what happens to your report. Because we've created a report here, but we don't have to do this every time we want to get new data. We only have to do it once. So you see here, we've got this, right? So what happens, and I've gotten this by pointing at a particular folder on my computer. So if we want to change the information there, change the data, we can simply get rid of the information here. So we empty the folder. And I'm going to put other information in that folder instead. So, great. Now, this is the same folder we just pointed at. So, I go back to my report, I go to data, and I just refresh the data. And you can see that we've got completely different information here. Now, if anybody can tell me who these people are, you get a free cake. The clue is in the prize, but anyway, you can see there's a couple of things to point out here. First of all, I know that in some instances people are required to only retain information for as long as they need it, and then they have to get rid of it. Okay, now it would break your heart to have to download 13 CSV files and go through all of this process every time you wanted to look up a bunch of information. You don't have to delete the report, and all you have to do is get rid of the data. You can keep the report, and then you just go back to Infohub, download your sheets, and press the refresh button, and you have your new list. So, I mean, it's a very kind of easy way of putting information together. So I need to actually replace that data again before I do the next section. So let's go and do that. So we'll get rid of this. We'll put this back in. There we go. So we've got the original data back, or we can just say it's new data if we want. So we hit refresh again, and you can see that we again have 1,300 or so rows in the sheet. I mean, you could add 100 new files to that if you wanted to. The key here, I suppose, to emphasize is that, let me see, where are we? All of the, let me just find that again. So all of this information here, if you're looking at a folder of data, all this needs to be formatted the same way. And we're confident that that is the case because Infohub, that's how Infohub stores the information. So getting information like that from a folder is really handy. And as long as you organize your folders in a consistent way, then you can always go back to this And then your report here, you know, if you want to share this with somebody, but you don't want them to see the data, you just get rid of the data and you send them the report, and then they can just get new information. And the other thing is, it's very easy to change the source of the data as well. So you can see here, there's my data source. So if I want to point at another folder, all I do is change the source. I point it somewhere else. So you could conceivably send this report to a friend who wants to point at another folder. Imagine you have two program managers. One person manages the, I don't know, software engineering, and somebody else manages Internet of Things. So you send this to them and they just point it at a different folder and they get their information into the data set. Now, I should say this in itself is maybe not the end product, but you still need to do reporting on this sheet. You need to make your pivot tables and whatever else you like to do. I'm not going to cover that today because we'd be here all day. But the key here is that you get better information here than you had at the start. Now, I'm going to close this sheet, go back to the presentation, because the thing is, although I have a sheet with all the student status in one set, there's more problems here because I don't know if they're registered to the correct modules. So we can do the same exercise again. Use Power Query to find and merge the required files into a single table. So I'm getting a bit stuck for time, so I'm just going to kind of shortcut this a little bit. If you dig a little bit further into Infohub, you can get a list of every module registration of every student on each stage of a program. Now that might sound like a lot of information to go through, and why would you bother? But I think, now let me see, what have I done here? Oh yeah. Here, the last set of information I showed you had about 1,500 rows. This one has about 16,000 rows because it's every module registration in BDIC. Right, and now this is really good information as well. It's different information. You can see here, I know that this student is registered to these modules. I know, this student here, well, they haven't confirmed their attendance yet. Now, there's a few problems here with this information too. Like the biggest problem I have is that I started off by looking for, if I can find my PowerPoint presentation again. I think it's disappeared. So I need to, just 1 second. I started out looking for one list, but I've made two, which is not what I want. I also, actually, the reports don't show me what stage of the program the module is at, right? And I need that information too. We have a partnership with BJUT. They have Chinese names. They have got their own student numbers. They have Chinese names for the modules. They want all that information on the report too, because we want to share it and we want to work together. So we need to actually add more information to this report. The next thing I want to show you in Power Query, I think I'm okay for time. We created, if you can see the folder here, there's current module registrations and current student status. Now, I'm not happy with either of these reports on their own, but if I put them together, it might be better. So let's do that. So go back to the Power Query formula, and we need to find the file that we created. So I'm going to add, first of all, the student status file to this. And so I need to find it. Let me see. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's in here. So I'm going to import that. Now, I don't particularly need this table. I just need the information in the table. So I'm not going to load it. I'm just going to select load to and only create the connection, which means that I can work with this table within Power Query without having to create a table here, which is useful because if you have a table with 16,000 rows of data, it's just going to make your workbook slow. And the more tables you add, the slower it becomes. But Power Query kind of does everything under the hood, and you don't have to have all these tables sitting around. You just set up the connections. Now, we've got a connection. We've got module registrations. We've got student status. So let's put them together. So we're going to combine those two queries here by merging them. This is another really useful feature of Power Query, because I don't know how many people are familiar with the VLOOKUP in Excel, right? Let's just assume that some people know what I'm talking about when I say VLOOKUP, and other people can ask those people later. VLOOKUP basically is where you have two sets of information. You are looking up a value on one table from another table, and you want to find the corresponding value in a different column. So for example, you have a table with the student number, and then 10 columns over there is program name, and so you want to find the program name for a given student number. Now the VLOOKUP works really well, but first of all, it's not really repeatable. The second thing is you have to have your data organized in a very specific way. If the lookup number is not to the left of the value you want to find, it's not going to work, right? This doesn't matter in Power Query. Anybody who doesn't know what VLOOKUP is, just ignore what I've just said, and let's just look at this, because honestly, if you've never done a VLOOKUP, you're better off learning Power Query. It's much better, it's much easier, and it'll save you more time. So student number. Now, what we need to do is we need to find a common value between these two tables. We can merge the data by ensuring that there's something the same about one table and another. Now, student ID is the same, so that looks fine to me. And so we just click OK. Now, some of the information on the two sheets is the same, so there's no point in if we have a student number on one sheet, there's no point in putting the same student number from the other sheet. So from student status, we're only going to select the information that we want to add to the registration details. So we don't need everything. Let's get rid of all that. Now, what is on the status that isn't on the module registration? That's what we want to add here. And the key for me would be registration status. And then I'm going to put year as well. That information is year actually is there. So let's just get registration status. That tells me if the student's enrolled or not. That's all we want. Now, I don't want that at the end. I want that further up. So let's move that around. And then we can drag it over here a bit. Source name, irrelevant. It's been that. And there's a whole bunch of empty stuff here. There's no point in having empty columns. There's no information, so it doesn't have any use to us. So get rid of that. And we're done with that. And we close and we load. And then we end up with data format error. Great. Okay, that doesn't work. So let's just forget that didn't work and show you what the finished product should actually look like. So what I'm going to show you now is kind of a registration report that is made from the process that I've just shown you, where you combine queries together. Now, I think I'm running a little bit short of time, so there's a few things I wanted to show about getting data from external sources, which I don't think I'll have time to do. Instead of that, I'm just going to show you a final report and explain briefly as I can how it was put together. Now, this is, well, first of all, this report this is the data, right? This is the stuff that you get when you add data together from different sources. This data set has got information from module registrations. It's got the student status. It's got the curriculum management system information telling me the stage of the module. I've got the CRNs from the part of the CMS that shows you the CRN. I can't quite remember where, but it's there somewhere. Then we've got the module status. Now, look at this information here: year of entry, Chinese name, English name, partner ID. Now, that didn't come from the UCD system. I mean, you can't get the Chinese name of a student from the UCD system, and nor should you be able to, because it's not, you know, it's not set up to do that. So this information, the Chinese name, comes basically from the Chinese Ministry of Education equivalent of a CAO list that you get sent, you know, of new students. So you can see how it's possible to add information from external sources to this data set as well. The year of entry is another thing which you know, Chinese universities focus on. It's very important. So now I'm pretty happy with this list because it's got pretty much all the information that I want. And after I make the list, that's the point at which I do all this stuff here, which is making these fancy pivot tables and colorful buttons and all sorts of reporting things. I've got a list of students here. I can see, you know, okay, here's spring registration. Grand, that all looks fine. Let's see, I want to know what this person is teaching. Oh, okay, great. I've got the list there now, so that's fine. If I want to look by module, I can do it that way. I can find out, you know, the total enrollment, etc., etc. So this reporting is something you have to do after you've manipulated your data, but it's kind of it's the end product, I suppose. But this is the key here. You can't do any of this without having this. So I suppose the thing to emphasize is that you need to get the best data you can to make the best reports that you can. So I'm just going to run quickly back into my presentation. And so really, you have lots of problems when you start out. You have information you want to find, you don't know where to find it. And Power Query can provide a lot of the solutions. I think it's good as well to, if you're creating I call it a data set, to think about all of the different information that you want to include in it at the start. Maybe write it down or draw it on a board or whatever. And then sort of think about where can you find the information. Think as well about how you can structure your folders so that it's consistent and it's repeatable. Because if you have your stuff saved all over the place, it's going to be a mess, right? It also really helps if you have an in-depth knowledge of how to navigate Infohub, which I know is a problem sometimes finding stuff there. But everything you need is there. It's just a question of finding it. And once you find it, then you can, there's really not much of a limit to what you can do with it. And the other thing, as I've kind of demonstrated, I hope, in terms of, you know, looking after data in the correct way, it's quite easy to ensure that you don't give data to the wrong people by just getting rid of it without having to you know, delete your reports and do them from scratch. So this is kind of, I suppose, a summary of what I've said. Power Query can be used with data from a whole bunch of sources, internal and external to UCD. One thing I forgot to mention actually was, this is something I was talking to Paula about a lot. I know a lot of colleges have student connectors, and student connectors can generate, Jeremy actually provided me with some really good training on this a while back. And the student connectors generate lots of information. And wouldn't it be great if you could put that information, well, the student connectors, I should say, also allow you to download a big, huge Excel file of information. And if you can put that information together with information that's available in Infohub, it creates a really powerful kind of set of data that you can actually answer the questions you get in a much easier way. And I think I know Paul has done a good bit of work on that in the engineering program office. But you know, think about any situation where you're generating information, you know, that's not necessarily from the system, but you need to add more information that is on the system. You know, Power Query is a great way to put all that together. So, you know, the second point here, you're setting up connections that are repeatable. You don't have to do the exercise of copying and pasting every single time you want to add information together. You do it once and you just refresh your source data, and that's it. You don't have to learn any programming languages for this. Power Query is basically a kind of a layman's version of it's a little bit like if people are familiar with Visual Basic in Excel. If you work with a large enough set of data, you have to learn programming languages in Excel, or at least without Power Query you would do, because it's impossible to manipulate 50,000 rows without having some way of automating the process. But Power Query means you don't actually have to learn that, right? So for somebody coming to this who's not necessarily familiar with formulas and coding, I think this is a much better way to get into this sort of data manipulation, because it's just easier. And a lot of there's kind of a sort of a graphic user interface, if you like, instead of the code that you can use. And it's very logical. But if you do know how to use formulas, and you know a bit of Python, and you know a little bit of VBA, and then you know Power Query as well you're kind of sorted, because you have the best of all worlds, really. And if you're really into, programming, there is a programming language within Power Query. And what's really cool about it is if you actually look in the Power Query editor, you can actually look, every time you create a step, you can look at the code for that step. And you can, if you wanted to, you could learn how the code works by just doing it that way. But if you don't want to know anything about coding, you don't have to. It's not necessary. And then the last point, there's a lot more of this sort of power stuff, if you like to call it that. There's Power Pivot, Power BI, and then within Power BI, there's a language called DAX, which is yet another programming language that Excel has. Just on Power Pivot, it's possible by using Power Query and Power Pivot to make a pivot table that accesses more than one table. So, for example, if you had one table of academic history and another table of registration, you could use Power Pivot to add the two of them together into one single pivot table, which it's extremely useful. Anyway, that's about it. I think we're almost out of time. So I don't know if there are any questions, Jeremy, or if people have gone to sleep or what.
No, there's definitely questions, and you first and foremost, which is the most important one, Una answered your question about who all those people were and said that they were chefs.
Yeah.
Correct answer.
Yeah, it's a list of a Wikipedia list of pastry chefs. So I'll just show you the list here. Pastry chefs, list of pastry chefs. There you go. So Una gets a cake. Can you just send me a message or something later, Jeremy? I actually will buy your cake and send it.
Well, there was a question about whether or not everyone who wrote the right answer would get a cake. So
there is not one for everyone in the audience. No, it's only just the one. First one.
Right. Okay. Well, now that that's out of the way, congratulations, Una. There were some questions, yeah. So let me just scroll back up here and take a look. And before I jump into the questions, there's one thing that's just pressing on my mind. There's going to be a bunch of people out there who have been watching this because everyone in UCD who's dealing with data is in a similar boat. They are pulling stuff from Infohub reports. They're pulling stuff from Excel sheets. They're putting all this stuff together. Yeah. What's the learning curve like on something like Power Query? What was it like for you? What would you say? Like, are you talking about a couple of hours to pick it up, or?
It's hard to say, because I've got to say, like I mentioned at the start, I've worked with Excel for about 16 years, right? I know how to write formulas. I know a bit of VBA. I used to use Python a lot to just add the sheets together as well, which is another programming language. Now, I actually don't know the answer. I don't know if it's easier to come to this without all that or with that. One thing I find about Power Query, which is frustrating, when you try to write a formula in Power Query, it doesn't work the same way as when you're just doing it in Excel. But that's because I know Excel formulas, right? If I didn't know them, it would probably be a lot easier to learn. A good example would be the if statement. So in Excel, you can write a formula, if this, then that, or else that, right? Now, you have to learn the syntax to do it in Excel as a formula, but in Power Query, it's just a graphic user interface. It's really, it just makes sense, right? So I think for people who are not really that knowledgeable about Excel, it probably isn't that hard to learn. For people who are used to using Excel, you kind of have to just accept the fact that you need to learn a bit of new stuff and do things in a slightly different way. I mean, I have created all of the reports I showed you. I created using VBA, Python, and formulas before Paula started her job as director of the China Joint Colleges office. Then Paula said to me, "Oh, have you ever tried Power Query?" And then I got curious, and I found that Power Query is a much more efficient way of doing it. It only took me, I'd say, a couple of days to learn how to use it. But like, I'm the kind of person that likes to sit down and kind of rework formulas and look at a line of code and see where the mistake is and all that kind of stuff. If that's not what you're into, if that's not what you like to spend your spare time doing, then it might take a bit longer. But I think.
But okay, so that's not going to sell it, right? But
I think it depends on your starting point, but I think it's fairly quick. I would say you could learn it reasonably quickly. You know, a week or two.
And time saved on the tail end.
Well, it gets rid of all the fiddly copying and pasting and all of the formatting you do. It kind of automates all of that stuff so that you have to go through the exercises, I think, a few times to get the hang of it, right? You need to kind of sit down maybe with something small, learn how it works, and then try to expand it from that. But yeah, I think it's a huge time saver. And not only is it a huge time saver, but it allows you to report in ways that are simply not possible if you don't know how to put data together. You just can't. An example, right? At the start of every year, we have the students, you know, confirming their attendance. Now, we have a system in most Chinese universities where the numbers are sequential and they're organized into classes, which means that you can use that number to determine what group of students a student's associated with. Every class has a class monitor, so you can actually use the number to find out what students haven't confirmed their attendance, and then tell the class monitor to give the guy a call. And you know, it's just small stuff like that. It's just not possible to do some things without having the correct data. You just can't. Yeah. And the other thing I found this year, we've been able to basically eliminate all registration errors, like everything, by having access to this information, so that there's not one single student in BDIC with any registration problem whatsoever. So that's quite good too. Yeah. We used to previously spend, you know, the first half of the semester every year getting emails from students saying, "I'm not registered to this, I'm not registered to that," and we don't have that anymore. So like, we saved ourselves 6 or 7 weeks of like fruitless heartache and answering queries when we don't really know why the problem arose in the first place, whereas now we do. So
yeah, so it's not just about what it allows you to do in the short term in terms of the process you're carrying out. It's about how reliable what you're creating is and what that allows you to go on to do. I'm conscious, sorry, of the fact that we're at 53 minutes past. We've got there's 3 clocks now telling me that, because there's 2 behind you and 1 on my screen.
Well, one of them is set to Beijing time, so if you're looking at that clock, you're
it's the minutes that are right. Okay, yeah. There is a few questions, so if you wouldn't mind just maybe briefly taking these. Yep. Does the formatting of external sources need to be rejigged to match the Infohub export formatting? If that makes sense.
Sometimes, yeah. But you can actually do most of the formatting in Power Query. So if you were, an example, InfoView reports, when you download the Excel file, they're formatted in very odd ways. The numbers are formatted as text and so on. So when you import it into Power Query, the Power Query can actually do all of the formatting for you. You can do it automatically, or you can do it yourself. Now, sometimes you do run into problems with formatting, and you have to do a little bit of editing there. But you know, it's not an issue really. Like if you were using VLOOKUP to compare 2 tables and the formatting was wrong, you'd have to do a lot of fiddling around with the formatting. But in Power Query, it's very, very straightforward.
And if the report changes that you're exporting from Infohub, presumably it's easy enough to edit the query to say this has changed, or?
Yes, but the thing about it is, if you're, again, just going back to the registration, I'm constantly downloading fresh data from Infohub, but it's the same format all the time, so I never have to adjust the query. All I have to do is replace the files in the folder and hit the refresh button, and that's it. So okay. It's pretty but sometimes you do have to adjust the query. It depends. And the other thing is we have other colleges, and if I want to create the same report with a different data set for a different college, all I have to do is point to a different folder which has different data in it. So
yeah,
you can copy this report into multiple contexts.
And on that, if you're running that, do you always have to, one of the questions here, if you amend your data in the folder, does it automatically update, or would you need to run a refresh every time?
You can do it a couple of ways. I think sometimes it's a good idea to protect the worksheet, because when you do that, you can't refresh the data, and that can prevent somebody if you want to keep the same data. That's one thing. And then the other thing is, you just you have to hit refresh to update. So replacing the data in the folder doesn't do it alone. You have to click the refresh button too.
Yeah. And a final question from, I think it's the last one anyway, from Ulrika, was, could hiding or deleting columns in your report affect later import of that data? If that data still has the columns in the source format?
You need to think in terms of the difference between the table and the Power Query editor. If you get rid of a column in Power Query, it's going to be gone from your report. But if you leave the column in Power Query and hide it in your table, it'll still be there. So yeah, it depends. It depends on if you wanted the column to be there but not to show up in the report, then you can just hide it in Excel. But I'd emphasize again, this is more about creating a data set from which you can make reports. So a big table, with that table that I have on the screen in front of me, has got 55,000 rows. Like, nobody's going to look at a table with 55,000 rows, but you'll make reports from that, and that's where you get your analysis and your information from. So
yeah. Absolutely. A final comment from Gregory Meakin here, just saying that given that Infohub reports are standard, is there a case for making Power Query products usable by all units, which is not necessarily one for you to take, but I think it's a valuable point.
Well, I mean, Power Query is available in Excel, which is available through the software downloads in the info, the My Software section. So everybody can use Power Query because everybody has access to Microsoft Office. So, Power BI is not part of that. That's something I want to kind of try out myself later. But yeah, Power Query is usable by everybody. It's just a question of, I think, rather than focusing on Power Query, to me, it's more about finding the information in the first place, and then Power Query helps you put it together. So you need to know what information you want and where to find it. And once you know that, you're in business. Like, oftentimes it can be finding the information that can be the hard part for people.
Yeah. The one final thing I wanted to mention, so Paul has said that there's loads of training videos, excellent training videos on YouTube. I'm assuming, what would be your advice to somebody who's looking at this and they want to take their first steps in using this?
Well, if you have some information, maybe just first of all, find your information, find a couple of different data sets, and then just go to Power Query and just try out the simple task of finding the data first, as I showed at the start, and then just play around with it a bit. That'd be the starting point. I mean, I'm just trying to think. I did a lot of Googling, right? I mean, that's my standard procedure here, is just Google everything. Every time a problem comes up, I just Google, and sometimes it's a YouTube video, sometimes it's just an answer to a question. But I think I would start off by doing that. Just have a think about something you want to do, find the information that you want, try and see if you can find it from 2 or 3 different sources, and then start playing around. It's always a good idea, by the way, to create a kind of I suppose you call it a sandbox of dummy information, just because you don't want to be deleting stuff that's important. But
yeah,
and just find an hour or two to play around with it, because it really, like, it'll I won't say change your life, but it'll certainly give you a lot more time to focus on more important things than just copying and pasting and so on. So
absolutely. Yeah, thanks a million. So I will get in trouble if I go over the hour, so I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank you very much, Michael, for that. What we'll do is we'll move some of the conversation over to currents, if that's okay, or we'll continue on with some of the discussions. So there'll be a link coming for the currents shortly, and then thanks everyone for coming along, and thanks again to Michael for showing up. That was really interesting.
Thanks.
Thank you. So I will spotlight myself.